prayer. It's the way you know how. Get your money too. Kinanishka Kanakritu Yana Kanakigula Mishumis. No gumni non de Namiakwe. Hey, Pandino Shumis. Get Ninika Gigat. No gumni non de Regimen Pandini Mishumis. Today, Creator, I want to ask some blessings for all our individual people that are here today. All humans, Mishumis. You're the only one that knows how to look after us. There's a little bit of you in each one of us, all living things. Hey, Mushum, you go to go come in a toot man on gay. Thank you for listening. Thank you for looking after us. Thank you for watching over each and every one of us, Mishumis. All our families, all our friends, relatives. Hey, Mishumis. No good today. I want to ask for a good session. Good things to happen come out of this meeting. You know how to do all of this. Help us today. We ask you. Look after us. Ask you to put a blessing on each and every one of us in the circle here. His family and friends, members. I want to sing a prayer song, and we'll reflect on all the good things Creator has given us in this world. Oh, excuse me. You're the only one. Thank you for coming to look after us, Creator. Thank you for all your help in looking after us in this world, beautiful world that we live in, created by yourself. Thank you for listening to us. Oh, hey, thank you.
Miigwech, thank you so much, Elder Wallace. That was wonderful. Thank you so much for that beautiful song. We've been so lucky to have Elder Wallace and on occasion Elder Florence join us and be our elders for this whole 369 series. And today is special because we get to talk about Indigenous ways of knowing. And we're so glad that all of you can join us today for the next conversation in the 369 series and to hear more about oral storytelling as a key component of Indigenous ways of knowing and teaching. And again, thank you so much, Elder Wallace, for starting us off in a good way and for this conversation. And we'd like to invite you to talk about the importance of Indigenous language, stories, and oral storytelling before we invite our other speakers to present today. So if we can invite you to hear from you on that, that would be great.
Right now?
Yes, please.
Okay,
thank you.
Sure. Good. Thank you. Appreciate that for the honor of asking me to participate. Jimmy Gwich, thank you very much for inviting me. I'd like to start off with, as you say, storytelling. First of all, I would like to just say that all human beings are storytellers and actors and everything that goes along with that, you know. And the only difference being is with the storytelling is our storytelling from the Indigenous side of things is ours is not written in any way, form, or whatever is a good word to use there. But all of it is memory, passed down from generation to generation. And we have a tremendous amount of stories. Each individual tribe has got their own way of conducting their stories, how they do things, when they start with the young ones, and it's a lifetime process. And when we're telling a story in our languages, it's quite a bit different from when it's being translated into the English language. Now, the English language is a beautiful language. All languages are great, beautiful. God gave us, Creator gave us all these languages to use all throughout the world. And they're all beautiful in their own right. But in our, where we are here in our community, when we talk our language, say for example, when I'm talking, I'm of Sutu Cree descent. And when we talk our language, it makes a whole different kind of sense when we're talking to our own people. As you know, we put in humor in just about everything that we say, everything that we do. Excuse me. And humor is a big thing. It's a good medicine, as we say. It takes care of a lot of issues that may arise in this world. You know, if you have put in humor in everything that you're trying to get across to people, it makes it easier when your mind is at ease, and you laugh at, you know, a few things, a few humorous things that come across. And there are people that are great at that kind of a thing, storytellers. They can almost make you feel what they're looking at, what comes out of their mouth, tells you exactly, you know, makes you see the picture, so to speak. And there are a lot of great people like that. They're gifted with that. Now, people like myself, well, we have a heck of a time finding the words to describe. But we do the best that we can, and but like I said, we're all storytellers, and we start telling stories to the youngsters right from when they're first born. Actually, the mother talks to the children while they're in the womb yet, and she plays the music and looks after, gets them started in that manner, so that when they come into the world, they're already started. They understand the language, They understand the songs, they understand the beat of the drum, and so on and so forth. And that goes on throughout our lifetime. There we have powwows that we attend. We have other ceremonial things that we do, and just about everything is ceremonial. Goes right down to even birthdays in our family. We light the smudge and smudge everything before we eat and do things. All the gifts and whatnot at a birthday party, smudged first and blessed. So in our way, that's what we do throughout our lifetime, and it keeps us grounded. We're people of the earth. We look after our people, our humans, our human beings, family especially first, and then so on and so forth. All your friends, all your relatives, all your even as far as everything that grows. For example, a tree, plants on the ground, things that crawl, things that swim in the ocean. All animals, big and small, they're all related to us. We're all related to everything that moves. Creator gave us a little bit of himself in each one of our living things, a little bit of spirit that's himself. So we look at life from that manner, and for us as Native people, we don't look to be getting rich with money and that type of thing. Mainly it's for family, mainly it's for looking after human beings and other living things, and just to try and live in harmony with everything. Such a beautiful earth that we have, everything was provided by the Creator for us, and that's how we look at things from our perspective. And as far as teaching our little ones about literacy, can anybody help me out here? What is literacy? Does anybody have an explanation for that? Literacy, is that teaching? Is that talking to people?
Meadow, I wonder how you would define it, if you can speak to that.
Yeah, literacy. As far as I'm concerned, I guess what it means to me is that it's the way we communicate with our little ones and business people and that type of thing. Anyway, that is about all I'm gonna contribute on this day. I thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to me. Oh, hey.
Miigwech, thank you again, Elder Wallace, for providing us with that additional wisdom. And if there's anything else that comes up for you throughout the session, feel free to please speak up. We invite you to do that. So now we'll turn things over to Dr. Meadow Schroeder, who's an associate professor with the University of Calgary's Werklund School of Education, along with her colleagues, Dr. Anne McCow, who's a professor emeritus with the University of Calgary, and Dr. Jacqueline Ottman, professor, vice provost, Indigenous engagement with the University of Saskatchewan. And we'll turn the time over to you. And again, if you do have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll address them towards the end of the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacqueline. And thanks, Elder Wallace, for that introduction to storytelling and literacy. It was a really nice way to start off this talk today. Today, we're going to talk about some research that we conducted on storytelling, but we're also going to talk a little bit more about that, like broader than that. but we are really talking about how we're building these bridges between school literacy for Indigenous students. And what we mean by school literacy is really this kind of literacy experiences that kids experience in school. And these can be a little bit different from the kind of literacy activities that kids get in the Indigenous context. So we're going to contrast those two things today as part of this presentation. But before we begin on that, I'd really like to acknowledge all the individuals that worked on this project. This was a big collaborative project, and we were very fortunate to have academic researchers, individuals from the University of Calgary, some of whom were Indigenous. So Jackie Ottman today, what used to be at the University of Calgary, she went over to the dark side, moved to Saskatchewan. We do dearly miss her. But Dr. Stan Bird as well was a student at the time who was really heavily involved in this project. And as well, we have our community collaborators. This was essentially a project we could not have done without this kind of collaboration. And we had the benefit of 3 elders from the community to support us with this research, as well as the principals and teachers of the schools with which we worked. So in this presentation today, we're going to start off with talking about this universality of stories, this idea of, and Elder Wallace spoke a little bit about this, right? Every culture has stories. And then what happens when these stories are silenced in a culture? And the reasons why we're promoting this idea of change. And then we'll move into our research and what we did in this research and give you the details about that. And then finish off with some conclusions, some limitations of the research, and then ideas for where to next. I'm going to hand this next slide over to Anne.
Hi, everybody. I'm really pleased to be here today, and Elder Wallace, I want to thank you for your thoughts. I have to say it took me about 4 years to come up with a bit of that understanding and some very, very difficult reading, and also, fortunately, some very good teaching from somebody who was my student then, Dr. Stan Bird. He was, as Meadow has said, just integral in this, and also Jackie, of course, they brought their wisdom to us. Sometimes it was hard for me to understand it, having a Western woman's mind, and it was really a mind-expanding experience for me. So let me start by totally agreeing with Elder Wallace that stories are universal. They're everywhere in our lives, and they help us understand, in other words, to make meaning of events around us. And they do it by helping us recount and then remember, because memory is an active process, and memory changes as we reinterpret it. So it helps us to reinterpret the events that happened in our life. Also, it describes the challenges that other people face and the way that other people and other peoples too, other cultures, have approached these challenges and these problems, and it offers solutions to us in that way. And of course, stories are entertaining, and stories do all this by helping us understand how events are related temporally. You know, young children start off with this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and maybe a because comes in there. But later on, by the time they get to adolescence, they're able to put flashbacks in that tell us more about the event that we're looking at because of the background that happened to that person, and more about the character, him or herself, of course. They also help us understand human intentionality. And that's how our actions and our behaviors are related to our motives and our desires, what we want and what we hope to achieve. So Jerome Bruner put that rather poetically in saying, stories have 2 landscapes, the landscape of action, which is what happens in the physical world, and then the landscape of consciousness, which is all the things that characters do in their mind, in the mental world. They also help us understand what's typical in our particular situations. And as Elder Wallace was saying, across cultures, different kinds of events are central to a way of being. And so they give us this idea of, well, what is typical in our context and also in other people's contexts, and what breaches might occur that cause problems that would happen to us. And finally, they shape cultural practices, lessons that are taught, and the morals of stories, things like that. And of course, also they're shaped by culture. It's they not only shape cultural practices, but the stories themselves shape the culture too. And so now Jackie Ottman is going to take over and tell us some more about the Indigenous stories within the Indigenous context. Go ahead, Jackie.
Thank you. Thank you, Meadow and Anne. And I would like to begin by acknowledging the territory that I'm on. And that's Treaty 6 territory, and Calgary's on Treaty 7 territory. And that's something that I'd like to do is situate ourselves in context with the land that really does nourish us and strives to keep us healthy. My name is Mizaweka Motan Dizanaka, Fishing Lake First Nation Donji. So I shared with you my my traditional name, and it's actually very hard to translate into English, but it's I'll say it a lot slower. So it has to do with thunder and the sound that thunder makes over a large landscape. So that is you know, again, there's a story connected to that. That's my origin story. And I am Anishinaabe Soto from Saskatchewan. And I was in Alberta for quite a while, and at the University of Calgary for 13 years. So an example of how we would begin any conversation, and Elder Wallace talked about that, is by introducing ourselves and a bit of our story. And there's even more that would happen as a child, because we're talking about storytelling and oracy and literacy. I remember people asking me, okay, well, who are your parents? You know, who's your mom? Who's your dad? Who are your grandparents? And in that way, again, you would situate, you know, this child in relationship with a larger community. And sometimes you also find that that you're related to this child or this person. So, you know, we begin with again, an origin story, individual origin stories. And so as the slide says here, stories really do transmit a lot. And Elder Wallace talked about how stories really do unify the past and connect us to those children not yet born, 7 generations into the future. So time is folded within itself from Indigenous perspectives, and so and story is, as Anne and Meadow had indicated, is very sophisticated and complex, and just as sophisticated and complex within Indigenous perspectives. And we know that there is so much embedded within story that sometimes you have to hear it a few times in order to comprehend the lesson or the message that that a particular story is meant to share. And so again, you know, story in that sense is a living entity in terms of all that I've just communicated. And it's connected with oracy, right? So an oracy, or you know, just the oracy can look very different, but typically, you know, because story is fluid and ever changing, as Elder Wallace had mentioned earlier, there was a tension between the telling of certain stories, actually there still is today, the telling of certain stories and capturing those stories either through print or through video. Because once that is done, it's embedded and frozen in time. So, you know, there is that that connection to cultural identity also. So it does develop the kinds of stories that were told from Indigenous perspectives are also meant to develop identity. And so if there aren't any Indigenous stories within classrooms, within any educational institution, then our educational institutions aren't supporting the development of cultural identity. So it is important to understand that there are various perspectives of storytelling. I think this is mine too, right? Okay, so as you know, there's within the last few years, I think there's been an awareness of this, not only the silent, of course, when you silence people, when you silence individuals, you're also silencing so many things, right? As we talked about cultural identity, development, and that influences self-esteem, and also impacts relationships between Indigenous, non-Indigenous people. So the implications are significant. When people are silenced, you silence the stories and the language. And so as it states here, with the imposition of the Indian Act of 1876, that became the federal government's tool for impacting every aspect of First Nation, Métis, and Inuit lives, including how children are educated. And the story, that particular story is actually, you know, a very dark part of our Canadian history, and how children were forcibly and intentionally through legislation taken away from their parents and their grandparents and their community. And so one of the first things that happened was to challenge and eradicate Indigenous identity through the forcible, you know, taking away of garments and cutting hair and punishment for speaking anything but English. And so the goal was to saturate the minds of children and their behavior with English literature and Eurocentric ways of being and doing. And the goal, as it says here, was you know, to kill the Indian in the child. And so the implications of the mandatory schooling are still felt today. So there's intergenerational trauma that's been experienced, and so there's loss of language, significant loss of language. And I've been very fortunate to grow up with a grandmother that didn't attend residential school, but was actually raised in the bush or in the forest, hidden from authority like RCMP or school authority, because those were the people that actually took the children. So she understood the story. She understood, she barely spoke English and gave me the gift of language as a result of that. But many children had to relearn their language, and they had to relearn the Indigenous stories that belong to their community. And a lot of people don't know that the Indian Act also was very intentional in inhibiting Indigenous peoples from engaging within the economy. So the Indian agents had full control of what was bought and sold for the community. And so there were actually Indigenous peoples Indigenous leaders that had to take the government to court in order to own businesses. And so, you know, all of that has implications on mental health, on physical health. Any kind of oppression, colonial oppression, has implications on holistic health. These types of symptoms are found in Australia, in New Zealand, in the United States. So again, colonial oppression has impacted Indigenous health in many ways. And so, yeah, I think I've kind of touched upon the very last point there also. So what we do know, and there's many authors, Leroy Littlebear, Marie Baptiste, and so on, that talk about the drastic differences between Indigenous education and Western schooling. And first of all, there is a difference between education and schooling. Schooling is very contained, it's got boundaries, and education is lifelong, it's got no boundaries. And so, you know, how could these two concepts be weaved within our educational institutions? They seem very, you know, binary, and you know, there's different values and emphasis, and you can see there is a strong emphasis on intellect and print within Western schooling, as stated here, and Indigenous peoples, most Indigenous communities understand that strength is strength and gifting really is, you know, there's multiple forms of gifting, and that's something that we understand today. You know, there's more than intellectual gifting, there's more than intellectual talent. And so where is our focus? Is it on, you know, cooperating and working together versus competition? Really does set up the kind of culture and climate that our classrooms and our schools are bound by, right? And so there's a lot of observations. One of the things that I always said growing up, and even today with my the elders or people in my community, is that there was a lot of listening. So it's active listening. There's actually literature on active listening and the importance of active listening and astute observation. And so when you're doing that, you're using higher order thinking skills, right? So storytelling, and there's the sophistication of that, is, you know, you're in the way elders tell stories, you're immediately asked to begin thinking deeply. And in order to do that, you have to listen and you have to observe throughout the whole time. And you're still thinking about the story after you leave. So there is complexity. So today, we know the implications. I've touched upon this a little bit, is that, and these are the intergenerational trauma implications of, we'll say, you know, residential schooling, and actually this what's important now is that Indigenous students see themselves within literature, see themselves within school, and hear themselves within the stories. And this is not, and the sad part is, within some of our schools or classrooms, provincial legislation on education, you know, there's some discouraging things that are happening in some contexts, right? And so there is this dismissal of the influence and the power of Indigenous perspectives, or even the engagement of Indigenous peoples in some of these very important decisions that are made for Indigenous peoples. And so, you know, and that's evident in Alberta, and also evident in various school divisions across the country. So it's, you know, there's 2 steps forward, 1 step back sometimes. And so I think we really we need to work together to ensure that Indigenous perspectives, Indigenous forms of literacy, because there is Indigenous forms of literacy. They're evident in pictographs and art, and that all of that is captured and part of the learning of all students, because what's good for Indigenous students is good for all students. Is this mine also, Anne? I can see you, but I can't see that.
I think we covered it. Yeah.
Covered it.
That's good. Yeah, thanks so much, Jackie.
Okay, thank you,
thank
Meadow.
you. Yeah. So in our study, then what we did is we used an existing storytelling program to try to bridge this Indigenous ways of knowing, culture, language, traditional activities into developing literacy in young kids. So storytelling was seen as kind of a stepping stone into later literacy development. What we did was take kids in grade 11 and grade 12, they were still in Dakota, and we had a nice little bunch of them, 100 of them, and we gave them this 8-month program with lots of lessons. We wanted to see if they were to take this program, could they have improved storytelling, so have better story structure and content, as well as be able to remember stories better, with the idea that this would be completely culturally referenced. And we did actually have researchers teach this program, where teachers were supported and maintained in the classroom. We did this based on this collaborative process with our partners. And so one of the things that we really emphasized was that this was coming from a strength-based perspective, not a deficit perspective with these children, that we wanted to adapt a program that was approved by the members of the community throughout this entire process in terms of even the research design, that this was to be used and owned by the community, and it was not to be used for commercial gain.
Okay, so this is my turn, right, Meadow?
Yep.
Okay. You can see the challenge before us. We're all familiar with the Western way that we're schooled, and we were attempting to bridge some of the components of the Indigenous ways of knowing. And at the same time, what we were trying to do was to use the ways that the children have understood stories, the way they've experienced stories within their own communities and their own lives, as a bridge to this schooled literacy, because it was a very important aim of the community, that they wanted their children to be successful within the Western schools. And so there were some of the components of this existing program that I had developed over a period of quite a number of years, and worked with other people doing it too, of course. There were some of the components that we maintained, what we called here the Western components. And actually, these are actually cognitive components of the program, because this is based on research that helps us understand children's cognitive development as it pertains to what is required in schools. So we maintain that, but then we added these other Indigenous components. For example, cultural legends. And these are extremely complex, as Jackie and Elder Wallace explained. Time folded within on itself. They're about the story. One story leads to another story, leads to another story. And so what we were trying to do was to use some of those stories in order to maintain the children's understanding of what story is and what it teaches. The other thing that we added in were references to community and cultural events within the story characters, within the community events, and within supporting materials. And we wanted to move away from just measuring storytelling and story recall to measures of are the children actually using these community and cultural references. And in subsequent slides, I'm going to speak just a little bit to these various elements. Okay, so what we did was we tried to maintain the problem or goal-based story that is typical in Western literature, like the folktale. And we also used what we call conceptual mnemonics. We're all familiar with mnemonics, like I before E except after C, and every good boy deserves fudge. But this is a memory aid that will help children understand what their story, what their concept of story is, and then to build on that. So we started off with this type of little line representation because we gave the kids stories, not only in words, not only in written words and oral words, but also in pictures. So we had the events mapped out in what we call a story frame. And this deals with all the actions. And this one, a little girl is happy. It's a beautiful day. She goes through the woods smelling flowers. All of a sudden a bee comes up. Oh, what's her internal state going to be? She's scared or sad. And so she runs away, and then she gets her sister to help her. She gets her sister to come back with her. And her sister says, don't worry, don't be scared of bees because bees make honey. So those are the actions. The actions occur in the physical world, and then there are these mental states. Okay, we also maintained the developmental sequence that had been identified once again in schooled literacy. So these are the elements we maintained from the previous program, because we're trying to ensure that the children are moving into the requirements and moving toward managing the requirements of the school literacy program. So they go from these social scripts, like a little girl walking in the woods and smelling the flowers and being out on a beautiful day. That would be the social script with her sister. And then we taught them simple problem resolution structures. And then that became more complex, whether it be some kind of a subplot, like the child tried something. Let's say she went and looked for her sister, but she couldn't find her. And then she had to ask her mom to come with her, that sort of thing, a failed attempt. Okay, Meadow, we can go on to the next one. And as I mentioned, we did a lot of adaptations. We had the adaptation of cultural legends so that children would be able to maintain the cultural use of storytelling and identify with what we were doing within the program. We also changed the content of some of the stories. Like this is a story in the old program, A Trip to the Cabin. A little girl realizes what date it is, and she thinks, oh, I'm soon going to be going to my grandparents' cabin. And she starts packing her bag, and she's thinking, uh-oh, I forgot something. Teddy, I saved a place in my suitcase just for you. And then she comes downstairs to tell her mom what she's going to do at the cabin. And so that would be a social script that children would be, mainstream children would be familiar with. We changed this to a community or cultural content replacement. This is a story about summer ceremonies, and Stan Bird had written a lot of these stories for us. He adapted these stories so that they would reflect the First Nations child experience. You can read it up, spare you my reading. Okay. All right, and we also replaced a lot of the manipulatives because we didn't just have stories in words and stories in pictures and stories in written and oral words, I should say. We also had manipulative advices because we know that many, many modes help children learn. And so we had a number of finger puppets, and we had thinking clouds that the kids put on their head. We had stick puppets, and we had hand puppets too. And we had a big book that the teacher used. And the story is written out there. The teacher would read it orally to the kids, and then the children would fill in with some help, some of the drawings. So they got many modes in there. Okay, we can go on. Meadow, it's yours.
So we found that after the children were exposed to this type of instruction, that they were able to tell longer and more complex and also more cohesive stories. They tended to still tell stories, for example, that had a problem and a resolution. So rather than just sticking to a social script. And they also were able to recall more content of the stories they heard. Jackie?
So one of the things that I guess I'll reiterate, first of all, that what happened during the project is, as Anne mentioned, that the stories, and Stan Bird is a Anishinaabe originally from, well, he's from Peguis First Nation in Manitoba, so he worked with the community community members to adapt these stories to the community, to the cultural context. And so, as you could see here, that some of the other findings from the research project indicated that you know, just the references to community and cultural life were very, very important. And so indicating that, you know, again, the children were actually providing us with clear direction of what was interesting to them. And if you don't understand the cultural context of a community, it's really hard to fill in these kinds of blanks. And so, you know, it's it really does encourage educators, teachers, educational leaders to really get engaged within Indigenous community to understand the cultural reference. And again, some of the important things that emerged over and over again was collaboration and the importance of relationships, right? And so you can see that is very evident within this story is, you know, just looking at it, you know, they skin for it. They make a blanket out of it for the mom when she gets cold. And she, Lisa, likes sitting down with her mom, and her mom covers her in the blanket too. And so you know, when you sit with children, they tell us a lot about themselves and how the community or their parents really do nurture their holistic being. And so, you know, the development of stories like this, I think, is very important. And so this is something that I mentioned again a few times throughout the presentation. It is so important in developing literacy programs, not only to emphasize oracy or storytelling, but to collaborate with Indigenous communities in developing those stories, and also again to bring in Indigenous content, which does provide you know, different perspectives, important perspectives to Indigenous students, and these are something that non-Indigenous educators I think need to become familiar with. And very, very important again is you know, just to scaffold instruction, right? And just to build upon you know, the learning upon itself. And so this study again was a strong example of that. And the limitations, you know, today I think there's we have a lot of work to do yet. And so we, other than probably in Indigenous communities, in general, our Indigenous students are still learning the predominant Western storytelling structure. And of course, you know, there's gaps within the mandated provincial curriculums. And in this study, it was a small sample. It's at one community. It was, we had amazing support from the community and the school. And so today, so it wasn't a longitudinal study, so we're not really sure where the literacy rates are with the students that we worked with. And also, we don't know if the, you know, to what extent the classroom teachers are using the program.
Thanks, Jackie.
There we go.
Yeah, that was a whirlwind. So we're just going to open it up, I think, for questions or comments from the group. Thanks so much, Anne and Jackie.
I'd be really interested in hearing Elder Wallace's comments.
Elder Wallace, can we invite you to comment on that? Would you like to do that?
Hello again. Yes, a lot of very interesting comments here. There is a lot of work to be done, but I think we have to get our people, the Aboriginal people, involved a little bit more with the teaching of our very young. That's where it all starts. Because when we start in our family, take for example, we've got a great grandson that just came to us about 6 months ago. And like I said before, we started teaching him right off the start. His mother started teaching him in the womb in regard to speaking, also native music like drumming and native songs, that type of thing. So you got him going early in life. Now, as he comes over to our place, I am teaching him from my perspective, the way I think that he should be hearing things, listening, you know. And I sing songs, I talk to him in my language, and same with my older grandsons. I have two of them that live with us full time. They're now 10 and 11 years old. And we teach them the same type right from the start. We started showing them who they were, what the language is all about, what the ceremonies are about, all the different things that we attend, ceremonial things like powwows, sweats, just everything. Try to keep them involved as much as possible. Now, as they're going to school in the Western way of being taught, they're not open. They're not wide open. They're closed in a little room of about 25 kids or so, where you know, they don't get the kind of training that they should really have. Basically, a one-on-one session or storytelling or that type of thing. As my little guys, when they come home, they're really frustrated. They are not happy whatsoever with the way things are going on in school, and they have a lot of I guess it would be prejudice going on with the other children also. So they come home complaining about that in and sometimes very, very harsh ways. And you know, we try to explain to them how to go about looking after themselves in a manner that's going to be good for everybody. But still, they run into these things, and every day they come home, you know, at this age, we're still teachers for little ones. And so that goes on and on and on. And I understand that they're not being taught anything positive about Aboriginal peoples in the classrooms. So that really bothers me. I like to turn to my young people like Jackie Jackie educated young individuals that have a good handle on the Western way of education. I think from what I hear Jackie say, she's got understandings from her elders, her parents, her grandparents, etc., and all the elders in the community. I mean, when you grew up with that, well, that's something that stays with you at all times. And for the most part, a lot of us that grew up that way, we stay quiet because people think we're not up to par with the rest of human beings. If, you know, nobody takes interest in how we speak, interest in how we conduct ourselves, interest in how we look, you know, that type of thing. So we have a lot of work to do in that regard. I always mention that we are so far behind in the intellectual side of the Western way of thinking. But that's kind of a natural thing too, because we learn from the land. We're land people, and our understanding is from the heart. When we teach from the heart. And you know, a lot of this, I notice a lot of the kids are doing a lot of swearing and saying a lot of bad words and that type of thing. My little guys come home doing the same thing. They copy, you know, whatever the other ones are doing. So I mean, this is kind of a ridiculous thing that we need to address in some manner. But if everybody else is doing it, how do you teach your children? You know. So, but all we can do from our perspective is shoot them and talk to them and do the right thing. If they follow that and pick it up, great. We must have done something right. And if not, and they follow the other way, a lot of our people do end up in being incarcerated and that type of thing, and you know, broken families. So, and I think it all starts from basic education, the way the children are raised and the way they are brought up and schooled and taught. But anyway, my thoughts. Thank you for that. Thank you for listening. Miigwech.
Miigwech, thank you again, Elder Wallace. Paxton, I know you're going to maybe launch into some other questions, so I'll let you take that from there.
Sure, yeah. And Jackie, Anne, and Meadow, whoever would like to speak up in regards to the questions. But the first one is, in storytelling, how many generations do you typically go back? And if anybody of the participants from the community has discussed that.
We go all the way back to, I talked about individual origin stories, and for me, that was the day that I was born, but we go as far back as creation. So, yeah, right from the beginning. And so, and there's not one creation story. If you listen to Mohawk, Haudenosaunee, and Mi'kmaq, and you know, the Anishinaabe and the Stolo nations, there's very beautiful creation stories, and so that's how far back we go. And there is definitely, it's important to be teaching our Indigenous, our urban Indigenous children, you know, stories. There was one study that I was a part of, and that was an inner city school in Saskatoon, and they had this is a public school, a 98% Indigenous student population. It was an elementary school. And so what they did is, in their assemblies, or their school gatherings, they would focus on a particular nation, whether it was Cree, whether it was Soto, whether it was Nakota or Dakota or Lakota. And so there was always that, you know, and that's something we do at the University of Saskatchewan through my office, is we recognize the diverse Indigenous populations that we have. And we draw people in to tell those stories. We draw people in to translate in all of those languages. So I think what was done historically within this context is that, you know, there was a focus on Cree and Michif. And so what we're doing is we're having a Saskatchewan-wide focus and drawing in all of those other languages, because again, we want our Indigenous students who come from various locations, not only in Saskatchewan, but for them to see themselves within the university in one way or another. And you can take that into any school or organizational context.
Thank you, Jackie.
Jackie, it's my understanding too that the stories are also tied into history, right? You would have a story, but it would be perhaps a historical event that would happen, that then elders would be responsible for holding those stories. So it's almost like your history is embedded within the stories, and the elders are the responsible ones to keep them and then keep the integrity of the stories and pass them on. Is that true?
Well, there's people who hold certain stories. And so, you know, we were asking about the Cree creation story in this location. And so we were told that this particular elder has that story, right? So it's not, or these particular elders would have that story. So it's not like, you know, it's the full, I would say, the details, they were transferred that story, and people recognize that those kinds of transfers that are still happening. And so there is, again, whether it's historical events, whether as, you know, for entertainment, there's certain people for that, whether it's, you know, life lessons, you know, again, so it's understanding the Indigenous communities and understanding who holds these stories. So one person doesn't hold, you know, the full extent of Cree understanding or Cree history. It might hold pieces of it, but some of these stories could actually be shared within a, you know, it takes 4 days to tell some stories. You know, so to have that kind of knowledge, you know, I would probably understand, you know, a snippet of some of these stories, but you really need to have that experiential, iterative, repetitive kind of relationship with these stories, because it is a relationship.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel like from the discussion today, the biggest takeaway I've had is just being intentional and consistent about engaging with Indigenous communities when we're talking about early literacy and the school system and how we're educating children in that and using these storytelling ways. So I just want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you to Meadow and Jackie and Anne. Thank you, Elder Wallace, for starting us today. And I appreciate everybody who was able to join in. We just want to say thank you very much for attending, and be sure to, we'll send out a thank you note again with our upcoming sessions. But yes, thank you again, and we'll hopefully everybody enjoys the rest of their week.
Thank you for having us, Paxton. We appreciate the invitation.
Thank you for the invite, and hope everybody has a beautiful day and have a good future.
Thank you, Elder Wallace.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
So grateful.